Hey folks, a year back if someone had told me that I would be making a video about reading more books, I wouldn't have imagined that I would be making this video, and I would have said, folks, hey, you know what, you're kidding. I wouldn't have betted my life to make a video like this. But here I am talking about 8 things that help me become a better reader, and I'm pretty sure that those will help you too. So let's get started. Hey folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In case you're here for the first time, I make videos on book reviews, and also I talk about stuff that are helping me in my creator journey. 2 things before we get started. 1, my videos sound even better when you listen them at 1.5x, and 2, if you kind of like what you're seeing here, do like, share and subscribe to my channel. Get notified whenever there's a new video. So let's get started. So as I told you at the start of this video, a couple of years back, I used to be a very sporadic reader. I wasn't very regular at reading. I would read one classic and I wouldn't read for months together, and then probably get back to reading 2 books again and not read again. But something changed this year and I started reading more and more. So I'm going to talk about 8 things specifically very actionable that you can start implementing right after you finish watching this video. First thing, have a fixed time and place to read. Again, this is no new advice, but hey, someone's got to tell you again, right? This is something that again James Clear talks about it in Atomic Habits, where if you want to become regular at a habit, state the time and the place where you're going to perform that habit and start doing that. For example, I read in my living room at probably mornings and early afternoons. I know that when it's 6:30 in the morning, hey, it's time for me to pick up a book and start reading a couple of pages. And similarly, immediately after lunch, when I feel a bit slumber and I feel like having a nap, I always pick up a book, read for 15-20 minutes before I get back to whatever I'm doing. So have a fixed place and time to read, and you'll be amazed at the amount of transformation that will happen to you over time. Second thing, decide what you're going to read the previous night. Okay, this is a classic mistake that I made, especially when I started. So I started this journey in December 2020 Jan this year. So what used to happen was I'll say, hey, you know what, I'm going to keep an alarm, start reading the next day morning, only to realize that I'll wake up in the morning, I wouldn't know what to read. So I would end up scrolling Goodreads, I would end up scrolling Twitter, Amazon and stuff like that, and boom, it would be 7:30 in the morning, after breakfast, start working and stuff like that. So, to counter this, I started deciding what am I going to read the next day morning. I'll probably have 2 or 3 options to read the next day morning, so that I'm not stuck waking up, doing my morning rituals, sitting to read, and I just start reading. So decide the previous night. So third one, switching off notifications. So very similar to the second point that I told. This is something that I'm trying to master at this point in time. So switch off all notifications. If you're someone like me, I'm easily distracted by notifications. I'm always wanting to check what's happening on Instagram, what's happening on Twitter, what's happening on Facebook. Who looks at Facebook anyway? But yeah, popping into my work chat and stuff like that. But yeah, so switch off all notifications, something that I'm trying to master, but on days that I've done it, I've definitely read a lot more. So switch off notifications, especially if you're starting to counter all the distractions that come your way. Fourth one, hoard a lot of books. Sorry to sound a bit insensitive with this step, but hey, this is something that I helped, so I thought it's worth putting it out there. So I always have 3 or 4 books that I haven't read either on my Kindle or as a physical book, just to ensure that I'm not kind of caught in this confusion of what to read next. Because more often than not, the book that I'm currently reading might not inspire me as much, or I might get bored with my current book. So I always want something that I can fall back on. It might be an interesting book, or it might be an interesting subject that I want to read about. So I always have like 4, 5, 6 books in backup, so that I'm never kind of when I have the motivation, I'm not running out of books to read. It's such a rare case. Fifth one, if there's one tip that I want you folks to take away from this video, it is this: quit more books. Right? I know this kind of sounds a bit counterintuitive, but here's the deal, right? We all buy books for $200-300, or we buy for $10 to $15, and we think that, hey, I need to finish this book from cover to cover. Let me tell you one thing straight: no one gives you an award for finishing a book from cover to cover. So feel free to quit books that you don't find interesting, or you think that you've drawn value from, or you feel that, hey, it's becoming a big draggy, right? The more important habit to inculcate is to read read more books, draw value from them, and execute them in real life rather than finishing a book, right? So it doesn't matter what kind of book it is. If it's a classic, has 10,000 plus review, every other influencer out there is recommending, if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. So don't feel guilty about quitting books. Quit books that don't suit your tastes and preferences at that point in time. Maybe you can come back to it later. Sixth one, read about things that pique your interest. This is a classic mistake, again, something that I did. So I'm into marketing, as a professional in my day job. When I started, I used to read a lot of stuff about, let's say, economics and stock markets and things like that, only to realize that, hey, you know what, I am interested in those subjects, but probably to read, it was a bit boring for me. So I started reading about marketing, copywriting, sales, and stuff like that, and I immediately saw an increase in the number of books I was reading. The reason, one, I'm genuinely interested about marketing, psychology, how people buy, and two, a lot of the things that I learned from these books, I was able to implement them in my job. So read about things that pique your interest. It is marketing and business for me. It could be, let's say, something like fiction or sci-fi or whatever it is for you. So read things that pique your interest, and reading will instantly become a lot of fun. So seventh one, follow the right people. Again, this is something that has immensely helped me. So I follow a lot of YouTube folks, a lot of Instagram folks, Twitter. A good chunk of who I follow on all platforms are people who are avid readers or are people who are making good book recommendations and stuff like that. So I'm always bombarded with a lot of people who are making book suggestions, who are writing book reviews, or who are writing book themselves and stuff like that. So I'm never short of inspiration. So basically, I'm kind of designing my digital environment to be that of authors and readers. So I'm never always into reading. So if I scroll through my Twitter feed, I'll see a couple of authors tweeting about their writing journey, or there are folks who are writing reviews of the books they've read. So I'm constantly reminded to go get back to my Kindle or my physical book and start reading. And eighth and the final tip is to start small, right? So a lot of times, again, this is something that I read recently on the web, I don't know where, probably I'll quote the source if I find them, is too much of good intentions is bad. For example, we wake up one day and say, hey, you know what, from today I'm going to read for 2 hours a day. Today I'm going to read 3 hours a day. Probably is never going to work. Or we pick the most thickest book from the library with the most number of pages. So always start small. For example, Jan, I started with saying, hey, I'm going to read for 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the afternoon, 15 minutes in the evening. So that's 45 minutes of reading, which is again good enough. But when I split it into 3 different small chunks, I instantly felt that, okay, I was reading more. It didn't feel like a lot of work. And combined with all the other tips that I mentioned above, it felt like, okay, I was starting to read more. And one more hack, I was hacking my brain into reading more shorter books. The ones by Seth Godin, or Rework is one good example. Those are short, crisp and punchy reads. Again, The Dip by Seth Godin is one good example, and books by Stephen Pressfield, again, a lot of short books that would give me the gratification that, hey, I'm finishing books, and would also take lesser time to digest or lesser time to kind of finish those books. So again, those kind of books really help me. It could be some other for fiction readers, it could be some other book for sci-fi readers and stuff like that, but always start small, both with respect to time and the commitment of the books that you start reading. So those are my 8 tips that help me read well this year. I hope these are of help. Do you think I should add any other tip to this that can help me read better? Do comment on the video below, and until next time, this is Praveen Ramesh signing off. Thank you, folks.